This is just showing a very, very limited peek into how you'd use Django-rest-framework with AngularJS. And if you're not familiar with AngularJS, it's worth checking out. It's like a knockout backbone, Angular, Ember. There's a bunch of them out there, but Angular is interesting, and I've been using it for a couple projects, and it's been, extremely helpful. So if you haven't checked it out, it's definitely worth checking out. A big problem with the Angular is that the examples are all too trivial. So it doesn't tell you how to do what you want to do. It tells you that it's cool and tells you that it's magical, but all the examples are very, very, very poor. All right, the documentation is relatively good, but it has a lot of scary words in it, like transcludes and scopes and crazy genius Google stuff, right? So, but it is actually relatively easy once you get past that. And they're addressing the documentation issues. So, if you've been frustrated with that, I think everybody has. But anyway, that's the website for Angular. I'm going to make the world's most boring shopping list. Right now, this is that's what's going on. There's a Django REST API built into that's already been set up, and Django REST framework, for those that don't know, there's two major frameworks, right? There's Tasty Pie and there's Django REST. I've used both. I'm using Django REST more often. It's extremely active. A lot of people contributing to it. And it has the nice user interface that comes for free when you build your API. You can add items. So this is a category name and whether it's important. So I can add an item to shop for right here, right through the API browser. It just comes for free. So how do you? We'll go look how you get that functionality. So basically, you have a model, right? Some item to buy, and everybody here hopefully has done Django models. It's very, very, very simple, right? So to hook this up to the REST framework, we just define a serializer. The serializer is just a fancy way of getting this to JSON or XML or what have you. And it follows, the REST framework follows the same pattern as the Django framework follows. So basically, just type the model name, put some fields that you want to serialize, and you're off to the races. This ordering is wrong. That's a typo. I did this on the train on the way here. Doesn't hurt it though. Still works. All right, so that's the model part, and then there's a view part. Okay, so we got a couple views here. We have a very, very simple application going on. The top is basically the index page, so you can pretty much ignore that. But right here and here, item list and item detail are all that you need to do to have a REST API for that model. All right, you can do a lot more, but this is all you really need to do basic stuff like add, delete, list, filter, and things like that. You just specify the model and specify the serializer class, and you're off to the races. So we'll look at the matching URLs, so you know how that works. So this is the URL. That's the home. That's the the top page, the boring shopping list page. And then there's two, this is an individual item right here, and this is an item list. So that's going to be the ID of the item, and that's all items. You can get fancier than this. This is just very basic. All right, so now, so we have the REST API, and we have Django set up and running, all right, but we don't really have, much excitement. All right, we have an empty shopping list, no way to add items except unless we go to the API view, which we're not supposed to know about. That's for developers, right? So if we look at the index page, the template, there's not much going on here yet. The shopping list doesn't have any functionality built in. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to step through this step by step and start hooking up AngularJS, just so you guys can see how that goes. All right, so now Angular this is a message from the Angular framework. We just hooked that up. Let me just show you what we did to do that. We added this JavaScript. You can go to a CDN for that, or right now it's actually loaded on this laptop. But you just need one JavaScript library, right? You don't need jQuery, you don't need anything else. You just need this. And as far as the frameworks go, it's pretty small if that matters to you, right? A couple other things that apps leave out, that the demos leave out. We're going to call our application shopping. And this is the unique thing about Angular is that it's declarative. You would declare stuff in your HTML, which usually you were taught to avoid that, but in practice, especially when you're starting to do dynamic Ajax-y stuff, everybody to some degree does declarative work in their HTML. So Angular is like a step to making HTML suitable for application type declarative concepts. And so this is the application. Most demos just say ng-app and leave out the name. So the name's important because you have to tie things together. Then you have controllers, and controllers are really just a definition of scope. And you can have nested controllers. So everything within a controller only sees itself, and it has a read-only view of its parents. Right? And it took a little while to understand that. There's not a lot of magic going on. All right? You name controllers as well. Another thing you might not see in typical samples is an initialization. And this is important when you're working with real-world applications. Like, I'll give you an example. You might have a controller in a tab, and the tab has an index or a name or a selector or something. And so you have and your application might have 4 tabs. All right. So how do you tell your controller what it's supposed to care about? You can pass information into that controller with this init declarative statement. And so what else we have in here? Here, that message, you'll see here init data pipes to JSON. So that is this ready for action. There's a JSON filter built into Angular, so in your template, so you can pipe any object into a pretty JSON view so that it's easy to debug and see what's going on. So we're just piping in a data from scope right into there, and you'll see more complicated stuff as we get there. But there's a problem. We had to put verbatim in here. And verbatim is a new tag for Django 1.5, I think. And the reason we put that in there is because the default templating braces conflict with Django. I'm going to show you how to fix that. Let's look at the JavaScript file. Okay, so this is this is just the start of the demos usually skip the JavaScript file because you don't have to have one. But we're naming things so we can actually do something. So here's shopping. So here's our shopping container. So this shopping is like the application, and then everything gets defined within shopping, so it doesn't pollute the namespace. So we have our shopping application, and we have our list controller, and in here we have that this is what gets called by ng-init, and all it does is copy the data that got passed into scope. And scope is just this controller's local variable space, really. All right, so let's make this do something a little bit more interesting. Maybe we didn't get interesting yet. We fixed the templating issue. All right, so what's happening here is we told Angular we want to use a new type of templating tags. So we did brace, bracket, brace instead of brace, brace. All right. So if we look at our HTML, you'll see that we changed that around. So that's because nobody wants to use that verbatim tag all over the place. So you can mix the tags, and it gets pretty powerful. You're going to find that you're going to want to use Django to do certain things to your templates dynamically, or put certain things in there, but also use Angular templates as well. You're going to use both in concert. It sounds scary, but it helps. You can do some very interesting things that way. Okay, all right, we're getting a little further. All right, so now we have a way to we have a shopping list with a category name, a save button, and and this is showing the list of items. If we look at the JavaScript, okay, we have a way to load items. So what we're doing here is we're defining a function in scope called load items, and this function is assigning a promise to call our API to this variable. And if you've never seen promises before, Angular templates automatically know about promises. And what a promise is that you basically, it's an asynchronous act, so you don't immediately get a list of items, you get a promise for a list of items. And then Angular knows how to do that in the template, but when you're actually dealing with that in code, you have to be aware of that. So we can actually go to our API view, put a category in, okay, and then we'll refresh this page, and we'll see that the items, that it did work. So that function did get called, and it populated the list, right? So there's not a lot of code here, and this happens sequentially. This gets all defined, and then at load time, we're calling this load item. And it's just calling this function and executing this promise, and the template language is picking that up. Picking that up here. So ng repeat, which is, I don't even know what ng means, but whatever. That's like just convention for Angular. So everything starts with ng, all this stuff, and there's a zillion ways to do it. That's another problem with the documentation, but this is the most common way you're going to see it. This is not valid HTML. You could put data-ng repeat in front of it to make it valid, but nobody does it that way. So item in items. So what's going on here is items is that variable in scope, and ng repeat is iterating over those items right in your template, and then we can't fit the screen, but you get the idea. Item.category is the category, and item.name is the name, and that matches what's going on our Django model. Right? So that's, and if you look over here, you'll see that we have a couple other things defined: ng model, and for category and name, and we have a save item. So let's go look at that and see what's going on. And doesn't do anything because we didn't really hook that up yet. All right, so that's really not helping us yet. So now we're going to make it a little bit more complicated. There is something, now we're at the time where a lot of people are going to go to this page on the Angular website and learn about resource. Resource, I'm sure, is immensely clever, all right, but it only works exactly the way it works, all right. So what's going to happen is if you're using the real application, it's going to go well in the very beginning, and then all of a sudden you're going to find out that it doesn't quite work the way you want it to work. It only works exactly the way it works. So what most people end up doing is saying, okay, I'm done with resource, I'm going to do it my own way. All right? So I'm sure resource works perfectly well for certain applications, but it's not hard to not use it. So what you end up using instead is this. And that's like jQuery Ajax. It's like almost identical to the Ajax call for jQuery. It's very easy to use, very similar. So it won't be scary for anybody here. So now I'm going to show you that. I think this is the last step in the presentation in case you've fallen asleep. Okay. So now we have some changes going on. We changed this. This became a select box, and we have a delete button. We have a little number there, a date, and some other things. So we'll explain what's going on here, but let's try to create something. And you can see, as I was typing here, you can see it coming up right here. That's because this is tied directly. It's two-way bound to the scope, right? So so basically, whatever you type there, is immediately registering in scope. I'm gonna hit save, and it posted this to the server through the REST API and added it, and it re-retrieved all the items and added to the list. These numbers are actually part of scope as well, and ng repeat, we saw that before, actually puts a couple things into scope. It puts your index, it puts whether you're the first item, whether you're the last item, and probably some other interesting things as well. But it puts things into scope so that you could leverage it in your template. So if you want your first item to be blue and your last item to be red, you could do that without any coding. Right? And the nice thing about Angular, you can get away without coding for a lot of stuff. So let's just delete this to prove we can. All right, and then we'll and if we want to look at what's going on here, let's okay, so we have two things going on here. We have a post. All right, so what that and that post is posting this information. This is the information it's getting back from the REST API, the Django REST API. It's getting back basically a picture of that model. The category, timestamp, an ID, and the other fields that we have defined in that model. And that's identical to this fields list that we defined over here, right? Now, as far as the JavaScript goes, there's now it's starting to get a little bit more complicated. Okay, we'll go through this from the beginning. All right, so this stuff we've covered already, but now we're adding a service, and I'm just being clever and calling it model utilities, right? Right, there's this scary looking handle error thing. Let's just show you what that is real quick. So that's basically if we hit save, why did I not do that? Typo. Computers are so freaking picky.
You didn't code this on the bus, did you?
I did on the train. All right. Okay. All right. So I tested it with category, but not. And then I could turn category into a select box, so you can't screw that up now. But now, so this field is required, and this is coming from Django. This is not coming from Angular. You can do form validation in Angular. There's a very interesting stuff going on there. But of course, you still have to do it on the server, right? So Django REST and probably all the API things, spit back a crazy kind of, weird, painful error message that you have to parse. So that's why we have that handle error function. So that's not going to be something you'll see on the examples on the Angular website, of course. That. All right, so what's going on here in this handle error function is way too much for this demo. All right, but basically, error destination is a Java object, and if it's a name, if it's like name or category, we're setting a property of error destination to that error message. If it's not, if it's a 500 or 401, all right, we're setting a form property of error destination to a message. So it's a little cumbersome, but basically that's how you get the right error to the right field. And if it's not, doesn't apply to a field, it applies to the whole form, and it just shows up in the scope, and you can display it right on your form. Okay. Right, so model utils is basically what Angular would call a service, which is basically a direct dependency injected singleton. It's just in this case, it's a set of functions that you could use to deal with Django REST models. And in a real application, you'd probably do this in a much more elaborate fashion. You might be getting into JavaScript inheritance and other crazy stuff, which I won't get into here. But it's this simple stuff going on. You get a URL. In our case, API/item. An ID. So that's how you get. So that's pretty straightforward. All right, and then save. We'll skip create for a second. Save is very similar. What it does is it checks if there's an ID defined. If there is an ID, all right, it does a put. If there is not an ID, it basically calls create, which does a post. All right. So there's not. This is not super complicated, but this is the equivalent of what $resource does. That we told you probably don't want to use, because once you reach your end of the rope, you reach the end of the rope. So this is so what's going on here is it's returning the promise, and eventually it is taking the response from the server and sticking it into the object. So whatever an object, all an object is a hash table in JavaScript, right? So we have create, save, and delete. Right. So the way we make that show up to our into our controller is we just inject it by name. Right, so to call that function, now it starts looking simple again. All right, we're calling save with the URL. We're calling it with our object. We're pointing to our error object that we want to store our errors in. And then after that the async call is done, we're reloading the items and setting the current item, blanking out the current item. Similar for delete. So we're again, it's the same concept. This is what I meant about promises. See, your code, like if we did this without the then function, and you tried to load items, what's going to happen is your item's not going to be saved yet. So you're going to load all your items without the saved one. Same thing with the delete. So you have to use this then process when you do asynchronous work in the code. Now in your template, you don't have to worry about that because Angular makes it magic. So there was some confusion early on when it's like you assume that it should all be magic, but it's not. So I think we could look at the HTML. So now it's getting a little bit more complicated. I ran out of time. I was going to show how to use Django templating to stick this in here from your normal model choices, but I was running out of time to get that fixed. So I just stuck it. I cheated and I stuck this right in. So what this is basically a JavaScript array, right in your template. So what's going on here for your select is, where this ng options tag automatically puts, when you have a select HTML, they have select, and then you have option tags underneath it, right? So what's going on here is this just loops through and creates those option tags for you. So and you can do some pretty clever stuff with this. This is like the most simple example. Other things going on. There's up here we pointed out this $ index. This is automatically put in there by this ng repeat. We talked about that. The date, item created on date. So the date does not look like this. All right, when it comes from the server, it looks like an ISO timestamp, right? It's not very presentable. So there's a built-in Django. Angular comes with a bunch of clever filters and little extras, so you don't have to roll your own. So this is just piping, that ISO date into this and converting it by default to a whatever format that is, a default short format. ng-click, we talked a little bit about that. So ng-click is how to hook up a button or any kind of a click to a function or right in your scope. So right now we're deleting item. So this item, we have an items collection. ng-repeat knows which item is in the list, and it passes that item to the delete item. So it makes it very, very easy to do an operation on the correct item. You don't have to put like a data-id tag in there or parse out attributes from an element. It's like if you just do a traditional JavaScript, you're going to do a click and then you have your event, and then you can parse out or do a data thing to figure out what ID it was. So because it's declarative, you don't have to do any of that stuff. It just knows it's that object, and that's just a JavaScript object. Yeah, it's well, I'll show you. It's all right. So that's kind of hard to. Okay, so it's a little hard to see probably when you're in the back, but so the HTML is being generated on the fly and stuck in and managed for you. All right, but you'll see that there's certain things going on that are Angular specific. Like this ng pristine and ng valid means that this is valid as far as it's a valid value as far as Angular is concerned. We're not really using Angular form validation, but that's part of that. You'll see that there's a scope and binding, which are internal Angular things. But at the end of the what you end up with is legitimate HTML, and it just enhances it for you. So this the click doesn't look any different, right? So that's that's basically it. I'm going to point out a couple websites here. Obviously, django-rest-framework. If you've never used it, it's definitely worth your trouble to play with it. It's super active. They accept changes. Angular, of course. This guy. I can't get the. All right, so this guy does articles on Angular. I mean, must have a lot of time on his hands because there's pretty elaborate stuff here. But I think Google hired him to redo the documentation on the main site. So anyway, that you can learn a lot. This is probably pretty interesting resource. And this is a bunch of very short to the point videos for more advanced kind of Angular concepts. So I only barely touch the surface, right? So of what you can do here. So there's so much more. All right. So but once you start getting into the more complicated stuff, especially the communicate between controllers or defining your own custom tags and other things like that, it can get pretty confusing, and some of these videos will help you through that. You can create your own filters. Yeah.
I haven't checked out Angular much. Thanks for the talk. But how are you kind of personally drawing the line between Angular and Django templating? Like, what really is Django templating better at, or where does it make sense?
Right. So the big thing is, if you're doing something that has to be, that requires a high degree of interactivity. Right. So recently, for a client, I did kind of a rule editing form, and it's a bunch of if then that plus a built-in RPN calculator, right? But it has to be easy for to use and has to be the browser. So that means you really going a round trip and having Django do all the stuff that had to be done there, is something you just want to jump off a building, right? But doing it like with Angular, turned into a complicated project into something that was done in 5-6 hours, right? You can clone objects, you can move objects up and down, you can drag and drop, you can do everything you want to do, but without kind of icky kind of selectors and jQuery stuff everywhere. So you can just do it, you define, but what you end up doing is you define kind of your user interface in HTML. And, we've been all taught that that's bad, but you end up doing that anyway. So at some point you have to have your user interface defined somewhere. So like in Django has all these super clever form widget building things, and 8 years ago it was fantastic, right? But if you try to make those form thingies do anything really complicated, I mean, unless you do it every day, all day, you're going to be lost. All right? If you're going to do simple things, it's great. But if you're going to be doing interactive, complicated things with Django's built-in form support, it becomes a chore, right? So for me, it's about when do you need the interactivity? When do you need to not do a round trip to the data to the server? So Django and most frameworks, I think they should be primarily involved in in enforcing rules, changing data, creating data, but they should not really necessarily be used so much for providing interactivity and complex user interface. So and I think that I think you still need both. Django is a great platform for doing this type of work. You still, a lot of people say, yeah, I don't need anything now. I could just do it all in the client. It's not true. Never when you're doing a real application. You still need a server behind the scenes, and Django provides a tremendous amount to help you do that. And some of those things are like django-rest-framework or tasty pie. The model. As much as people don't like the ORM, it's still fine for most people. Security, session management, and when you have to, so it's still, you still need all those things, even with, an Ajax application. So, that's a.
Another question. So for Django REST, what kind of features does it have to support? Say you want to build an external facing API. Tasty Pie has like account provisioning and generates tokens automatically and it's throttling. Does Django REST offer those sorts of things that allow you to easily create accounts for third-party developers, throttle their usage, and just kind of control?
Yeah, it has OAuth 2. It has tokens. You can use it kind of as a standalone API, or you can use it in concert with a regular website, so that you could leverage the user's existing session, the traditional, logged in session cookie. So it has all the same similar types of things. They're both perfectly good projects. I'm just using Django REST more often, because it seems to be a lot more active. I mean, they fix bugs right away. They cut a release. If you put a question on their mailing list, you're going to actually get an answer right away. There's probably 20 active developers on it. So that's.
To elaborate on that point, I'm about neck deep in this stuff right now. Tasty Pie is kind of very much resource based. You go to resource. And REST framework is basically class-based views. It inherits from Django's class-based views. It does support the same stuff in the end, but it's very much how you develop, depending which one you pick. So I find class-based views a little more flexible for your own API stuff, but it has the same basic functionality.
This works jQuery and Angular cross paths, or do you use one in place of the other? Or do you use your examples? You don't use jQuery at all.
You can still. You have to be careful. That's where it gets to a little bit of a gray area. So Angular includes a built-in version, kind of they call it JQ Lite or something. So you can still do element stuff and selectors and things like that without jQuery. It's built in. But a lot of people are going to just use jQuery and Angular, and it's designed to work okay. What you don't want to do is manipulate the DOM from within your controller. They kind of frown on that because it becomes, kind of spaghetti-ish. So it kind of because that means from your controller, which is supposed to be clean and not see anything and touch anything it doesn't know about. Once you can throw in a bunch of jQuery stuff in there and do whatever you want. Nothing's stopping you, but it's kind of frowned upon. There's other approaches. You wrap things up in services, just like I did model utils. You might have a different service that manages your tabs for you. There's a project called Angular UI. Which I really should have probably mentioned. All right, let me change the site. All right, so they have a bunch of add-ons, and these guys are doing it. All right, so they just broke the site, but that's okay. Pardon our dust, but you know they have a bunch of things that they're working on that more UI. So Angular by itself doesn't do anything with user interface. As far as it's concerned, HTML is a user interface. That's it. So if you want fancier stuff, then you need to use libraries or roll your own. So there's a bunch of stuff here. There's modules, Bootstrap. So this uses Bootstrap styles, but no Bootstrap JavaScript. So if you want fancy dialogues or buttons or tabs or accordions or whatever, you leverage a library like this, right? Instead of going to Bootstrap native or jQuery whatever, you would do this. Now, sometimes you have to. You don't have a nice library like this, and you need to do something. What I've done in kind of situations like that, where you don't have time to kind of create your own directives, which can get very complicated. That's what these guys are doing because they love this stuff, which is great. But if you don't have time for that, what you do is use like pub/sub, if you've heard of that. All right, so that's basically a JavaScript publish subscribe message queue, and it works universally with from whether it's jQuery or Angular or whatever, and you publish a message and subscribe to messages, and you can hook anything to anything without kind of locking them together. And that works really quite well when you don't have some kind of a native tool to work with. If you search JavaScript pub/sub, you'll find it. Anything else?
Thanks, George.